today with the Technical Writer HQ community. Now, I would love to hear a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hey, thanks for having me, Josh. I'm really happy to be here. My name's Heather Greiner. I've been a tech writer for almost 30 years. I started way back in the 90s in FrameMaker 4 and have moved into the wonderful world of online working and GitHub and doing docs like code. I've worked in many fields. I started in Spark hardware, Sun reseller stuff, building RAID boxes and servers. And I've worked in finance. I worked for Deloitte and Touche and City National Bank. I've worked for CSUN, Cal State University Northridge, in their IT department. I spent about 10 years in cybersecurity, which is a blast. And I've also worked in entertainment, which is where I am now. I'm in Riot Games.
Very cool. And for everybody watching, feel free to ask comments as we go along and ask questions, and we'll go ahead and make sure to bring those up. Now, one of the
Great.
things that I find really interesting about what you do now is you do a lot of analysis as well on the business side.
Yeah.
And I think many people are coming here today going, what does that mean, mixing these two worlds together of technical writing and business analysis?
Yeah. Um, the BA side of things is great because it gets you in the door at the beginning of the software development lifecycle rather than at the end where technical writing typically occurs, which is an, oh no, we need to document this as we're less than a week away from ship. So, and then it's you're interviewing everybody you can possibly find. You're getting your hands on a beta. You're doing everything possible, and you're pulling your hair out because you now have the worst deadline in the world. So being able to do the BA side of things means you're working with the engineers early in the development cycle and you know who your stakeholders are ahead of time. So when you're in that initial kickoff meeting, you can say, great, where's my UX designer? What does this thing look like? Why does the user care? Because engineers and developers work so hard to create really cool things and they want to tell you every little thing they did. But at the end of the day, the developers don't care who are using the product. They just want to know if I click this button, is it going to do the thing I need it to do? So having the BA side of things allows you to ask those questions and get your stakeholders and get your customers early rather than late.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like, is that what drove you to go in that direction with your career? Was this sort of challenge that you were facing? You're like, I need to get there early.
It was definitely a challenge early on, and I was blessed to have some really cool mentors who were definitely under the hood kind of technical writers. I always say there's my side of the world, we speak engineer, but we're not engineers. Where I deal now at this point in my career, I work peer to peer at the engineering level. So my end users are developers as well. Whereas I'm not reaching the back in the day, the person who was actually loading the software and running QuickBooks. Or, your 65-year-old mother who just got a new printer. I don't work with those, I don't work for those end users anymore. So the BA side puts me in that program management piece where I do a lot of Jira now. I do a lot of pre-planning and it allows me to create content that's more meaningful and brief. Developers who are working with APIs, especially where I tend to live, they want to do it themselves. They don't want a lot of narrative. They don't need a lot of background information. They need a cookbook. They need the code sample. They need to know the parameters. They want to hit the ground running until they break a thing. When they break it, then they've created an edge case and everybody's interested.
Oh
So
my
that's
gosh.
that's where I like to live.
And you had so much experience in documentation. I know you have so many great stories to share, and I'd love to really dive into the stories because I know our audience loves them. Some of your favorite pieces that you've worked on, and context like what did the team look like? What was the outcome, and those type of things.
Most of my, I've had the wonderful experience of being on a technical writing team a few times. Most of the time, I'm a lone writer. So I end up having to do BA work and technical writing work, sometimes graphic design, which I am rubbish at. And I am so grateful for UX designers and graphic designers who can do those things for me and I can collaborate with them. Um, yeah, some of my favorites have been when I've worked with a team where it's like, okay, we've got 500 pages to document. You handle install, you handle this functionality, you handle this functionality, and be able to work embed with our QA people and with our engineers while they're working. And I've been in the room where I've had a development manager say, okay, where are we at? It's like, well, this button doesn't work. And I've had them say, well, no one's going to click that button. Well, I did. I clicked it and it didn't work. It caused an error. And QA was like, oh, that's not part of our script. It's like, but I know our customers. I'm embedded with the people who are using this docs. So having that level, and I can give back to the engineers so they can create better and make and build in features they didn't know they needed, because we tend to be up against the bark and we forget that there's a whole forest. And so some of my favorite stories working, I think when I interviewed, that's one of my favorite stories, is I walked into an interview and they didn't know what technical writing was at Riot. I was the first tech writer they ever hired. And so I had a tech interview. I had to interview with engineers and they said, okay, so how would you write an API? I said, I wouldn't. And then we sat and stared at each other for about a beat. And I said, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to tell me about an API you created. And then I got up on the whiteboard and I said, okay, so there's an endpoint. There's a data set. What are the calls? Are we adding data? Are we pulling data? Are we updating data? Are we patching data? And then what are the parameters? What are the flags? And by the end of the hour, we had this whole whiteboard full of what would turn into a technical document that another user who needed the API could use. So it's an education piece for me, educating my engineers about how to give me information, and then educating my engineers on how to digest and read and consume my information. So those are my favorite stories, where I can work with collaborators, engineering, other writers who want to learn and want to make better. And yeah, I have lots of funny stories. The engineer who I came and said, I need this, and his answer was soon. So I had a clock made for him. Every time on the clock said soon. I said, okay, Slavic, it's soon. Give me.
I love that interview story. I feel like a great way to land a job. It's like you're coming in there and really making it. What I like is you can say things, but if you can make it tangible and be like, okay, here it is, they're like, oh, wow, I get it.
Yeah.
And must have been a big aha moment for them, just like sort of seeing the shock on their faces.
When they've never had technical writers before, and they're especially a startup mentality. And because I work in GitHub, I work in a docs like code world, I don't expect developers to come into my world. I play in theirs. So I play with code and I break code a lot. But I understand it enough. So when I go in there, they know I'm trying to play in their world. And they find it easier to say, okay, how do I do this better? How do I communicate this better to make it work on your doc site? And I find that level of collaboration really great. And I can educate them as much as they're educating me. Chances are I'm never going to use their product. I'm not a developer. I'm never going to run an API, but I can log in. I can, most people don't understand when you log into a service or your game or your QuickBooks, just entering your username, password, and clicking enter launches about 30 services across multiple platforms. And I get to document all that. I get to tell all of those, because those are not all one person. It's not all one team. Oftentimes that's hundreds of engineers who need to sync up, and they don't have time to talk to one another. They have time to talk to me, and then I can talk to all of them through my doc site.
Yeah, I think people don't necessarily understand how much APIs run the online world today to a large extent. Like they'll be like, oh, this site maybe uses one API if they don't really know, right? It's like, that's not the case at all. It's like, it's pulling so many requests that and there's so much documentation needed around it. So I think that's a big hurdle for people entering the world of technical writers. Maybe people watching this video today they've heard of API technical writing and they go, oh, this is the new cool thing that technical writers are trying to get into. And they're looking at Googling, what is the definition of an API? But the overall context of how it really runs the online world is missing.
Yeah. And most of our API documentation is in the form of cookbooks, which is just copy and pasting text. And just because they need to change a couple of parameters. So it's really, they're big reference manuals. They're big, huge, just tables and tables of data. And being able to format that data so that it's usable is key and searchable. Back in the day, I was a member of the National Society of Indexers. So making sure data is accessible and you can find what you need quickly and get to exactly where you need to be and move on with your life is a success for me. Anybody who gets to my site and can't find what they want, it's a failure.
I would love to hear how you're involved in the documentation process right now. Are you guys working in sort of an more agile environment? Is there like a Scrum team? How's that working?
Um, Currently, I'm a team of one. There are 3 technical writers at Riot. I'm on Player Platform, which is the back end tooling. My coworker is on the game, is one of the game engines, and then I have another coworker who is running the IT side of the world. So there's the whole 3 of us for the thousands of rioters that exist in our company. We're a growing, tiny but mighty team, but we are siloed. I work with engineers building tools, so I'm involved with. I have my own Jira board, my own Kanban board, and then I have to integrate with every other development team and work on their Jira boards, on their scrums. So I beg and plead with every delivery lead and every team captain, please, please, please put documentation as part of your definition of done. Because I can't possibly know what every team is doing. But if you put it on your stories that, hey, this needs documentation, then at least I have a flag that I can go chase down. And working in an agile environment gives me, as a writer, the opportunity to constantly churn because I can have something and turn around and review, and I can spin up something new while it's being reviewed by my subject matter experts, by my QA people, and I can begin something new. So I can work on their cadence without actually locking myself into a sprint. So it's kind of a weird walk to get in the delivery lead space to do Jira and to actually be agile to say, okay, this has to be reprioritized on the fly. But when it works, it's brilliant. And we do a decent job of it. A lot of
Yeah, I
people
do.
say it, but don't actually do it.
I was about to say the same thing. They're like, we're an agile organization, but we're not really agile. We're trying to be agile. There's a big difference.
Big
Yeah.
difference. Doing it and saying it, or it's like you have a Jira board, but that doesn't mean you can change on the fly. Riot will spin up silos really quickly to say, hey, we've got a problem to solve, which is part of the BA side also. Identifying a problem to solve and being able to spin something up quickly to address that problem and then spin it back down when the problem is solved. That's agile. That's, sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's 2 or 3, but it's spin up. It's like, we have a problem, let's cherry pick from teams, spin it up, get it out the door, and then we can go back to our lives.
Yeah, very true. And I'm curious if, because you're using Jira, are you spending a good amount of time also in Confluence?
No, I specifically do not spend time in Confluence. um, that's my IT counterpart. He manages the Confluence side of things. I do get to live in code in GitHub, and I do not have a Confluence backend on my site. I do not run a wiki. I run a curated doc site that
Mhm.
has quality assurances. It doesn't have pages of comments, and you don't know when it was updated last. You don't know who these people are and if the content is trusted anymore. A curated documentation site runs differently than Confluence. So yeah, I don't touch Confluence.
It's interesting that you do mention those points. I've brought up some of those similar points to people who use Confluence for documentation. Like, how do you know when it was like last reviewed? Who reviewed it? And like, what is the, yeah, all those type of things regarding verification sort of scare me.
Yeah,
And I just feel like it's definitely missing from there. I think there's maybe good for younger startups or people who just haven't found the need for verification yet until something hits them and they're like, oh, why weren't we doing this?
yeah. When it's not trustworthy and you're having to read through comments to see what's actually true. Your doc wikis are great for certain things. For internal team knowledge, they're great. But if anybody outside of your team needs to know how to use something, your wiki becomes useless.
Yeah, I have seen some tools pop up. One in particular called Almanac that is trying to treat documentation more like code, and I think they're doing a good job. But at the same time, as soon as you start doing that, there's a complexity hurdle for, I feel like, technical writers and other team members to understand how to use it,
Yeah.
which is the whole other side. And one of the things I'd love for you to talk about is many people in technical writing are looking to get more into the software world and get into the world of code to some degree. And how was that journey for you? And do you have advice for them of how to make that process easier?
Um, the best thing you can do is dig into learning what APIs do, because the APIs are not going away. Cybersecurity is not going away. These are two places in our field where we're always going to be needed. Um, and really digging into how the APIs work and being able to explain them and understanding what they do. It's kind of like reading a recipe. If you can follow a recipe, that's what an API kind of does. It's like you have your tools and you have your ingredients that have to go in to make a thing at the end. And understanding that will get you a long way into working with developers, which is ultimately where we need to be, is understanding what the developers are trying to create to deliver excellent user experience. Because that's what we're here for. We're here to teach our users how to have a good experience with our product. They don't care what we did to make the thing. They just want a cool thing. So studying, I'm big on learning back end tooling like GitHub. Um, there's plenty of GitHub is open source, so you can get, there's tutorials, hundreds of them, open source websites that you can pull and crib and learn. And if you're in GitHub, you're working in the developer's world, and that is a huge leg up that I see a lot of technical writers struggle with, because they're living in, well, not FrameMaker anymore, but they're in Flare, or they're in some other, or they're in Google Docs. It's like, yeah, that's great, but you don't have control. You don't have the code base that you need to understand what's happening. So really getting into GitHub and learning it, and it's free to learn. It's free to go in, and you can spin up your own site, and you can start putting up code samples, and you can start learning from other things and build your portfolio that way, so that when you on your LinkedIn page you have URL to your GitHub repository, and people can see, oh, okay, this person actually has done API work, and there's samples of what they can do, and you get to learn some design features, and you can spin up some pretty cool sites that are pretty basic using things like minimal mistakes is a great open source formatting tool that uses Jekyll. um, Docosaurus is another one that's coming up. There's Content Stack, which is CMS, and it's good to know what content management systems are doing. Um, Wikis are less interesting now. They used to be all the rage, learning wiki markup and things like that. But honestly, if I have a text file that I can save as a markdown file, I can pretty much make anything work. Just like in the old days, if I had a text file that I could save as HTML, I could build a site. And learning that backend tooling will take you a long way, and it's free to learn.
And I think, working backwards, it's also asking, like, who are you collaborating with? Like, if you're collaborating with engineers, then ultimately you want to use something that's accessible for them. Like, I feel like
Yes.
tools like Madcap, you're not going to have engineers using Madcap with you. It's just not going to happen. And we're moving towards where there's a lot of focus on engineering processes and how to get involved in that process, like you've been saying, right?
Mhm.
And I think maybe starting there as like an endpoint and then being like, okay, well, I collaborate with engineers better. Look like.
Yeah, working an engineer is much more likely to provide feedback if they have a pull request, which is just the straight code. So what I do is I have a mirror site, a staging server, where I will create a pull request, and I'll also push the content up to my staging server so they can see it live, they can see the formatting, and then they can also see the code, so they can go in their world and they can make edits. They're not going to edit a PDF. They're going to comment on a Google Doc. That's fine. And that's great for the BA work. When you're formatting and getting an idea of everything that needs to be included in your in your doc site or in your topic section, and you have your format, you have your flow charts and all of that, Google's great for that. And everyone's happy to collaborate because they can do it asynchronously. And the asynchronous part of feedback is probably your savior in maintaining an agile environment, because These people can be your developers and your subject matters and your QA people can all be editing and reviewing while you're doing other things, and it doesn't require a meeting. And anything that doesn't require a meeting makes everybody happy.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that's almost a better endpoint to work backwards from.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Um,
So
Go
one of the
ahead.
things I'd love to ask you is about your journey of having a career that's been, I'd say, continuously like learning and growing and over a length of time. And for many people, that's very difficult. And for technical writers I talk to, they go from like contract job to contract job. And there's like a period of maybe even like 6 months where they don't have any work. And they're trying to figure out the best skills and the best ways to stay marketable to ensure that they can get jobs that they like and all of that. So there's a lot that goes into that.
I feel that deeply. I was a contractor for many, many years. The hired gun mentality for tech writers is very real. We come in, and one of the things I like to stress when I was on a contract for 3 months at Lionsgate Films that lasted for 3 years because I proved my worth. We're oftentimes a proof of concept. Like, we don't know why we need a tech writer, so let's bring one in to do a thing. And one of the things that I stress for younger tech writers is to say, make sure they understand as soon as you leave, that document is no longer trustworthy because it's no longer being curated and no longer being looked after. We're librarians. We love our docs. We make sure they're cared for. We make sure they're up to date and accessible and usable, and that everyone gives them the love and care they need. As soon as we leave a contract, those docs die. We just automatically have to assume they're not going to live anymore, and they're going to go right back to where they were when you brought me in. And starting there in an interview saying, great, I will get this done for you, but understand when I leave, you're back here. You're back at square one. And proving your worth, proving your value to the team and to an end product is invaluable. And being able to do the BA work of, I made the mistake once of walking in brand new saying, okay, where are the functional requirements for this? And the senior engineers started laughing hysterically because it had been years since they'd heard those words. I was like, okay, well, let me write one. And being a BA and having that background gave me the ability to sit down with them to get the requirements that they were working on. And that's why BAs are great. Riot didn't have tech writers, Riot didn't have BAs. Now we have both. And we're great tools, we're great collaborators, and we help our developers, we empower our developers to do their jobs well, to deliver an excellent player experience, an excellent customer experience. And that's ultimately what we do. We're support players. And our engineers and our developers and our game people, they need our support so they can do their work.
So true. And one of the things I feel like you have a good grasp on, and that I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on, is this idea of the future of technical writing and where you see it going. I know that's a very broad topic, to say the least. But when you think of the future of technical writing, like what comes to your mind?
What comes to my mind is where we used to be. And people always say, wait, what's a technical writer? Or we have technical writers? Those are the two questions I hear frequently. But I always say, back in the day when we bought software and you went to Best Buy or Fry's and bought the box, and it was this big box, and you didn't know what, because it was just floppy disk inside or CDs. I'm that old. But there was also a big manual inside wrapped in cellophane. And you know that cellophane you never took off? Well, I wrote that book because I wanted you to have it so you knew how to do things. But instead, you just called technical support and made them do it. So we changed tactics to now we're giving technical support the information that they need to get their users quickly, and they're not breaking anything. They just want to know how to do it. So we empowered our technical support people to give them the tools to say, did you read the doc? Did you do this? Hey, you know what? There's an online assistance program. You can push F1 and get a quick start guide that says, do these 10 things before you call tech support. That was groundbreaking. So we keep making these leaps to now you can YouTube. People will watch a 2-minute video on how to do anything, how to make a meatloaf, how to fix a toilet, how to run a piece of software. So being able to do videos and doing podcasts and things like that of how to do things so that not everybody reads, understanding where our audience is shifting to. Like my son is 15. He and his friends, like I have my watch. And me and my generation, we love our iWatch. We love our Fitbits. My son could not care. They don't care about gadgets. They don't matter to them. They want tech they can use, which is go to YouTube, 30 seconds, they're in game, they're in the product, they're running, they're doing. So we need to be more and more minimal. Everything needs to be task based. Everyone needs to do a thing. So start from what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What will I be able to do when I'm done? If you can answer those 3 questions, you have a successful technical document. That's where we're headed. Shorter, for short attention span theater. Nobody has time. Nobody wants to scroll. Everyone wants to do a thing and they want to hit the ground running and they want to do it themselves. But when they fall, they need that safety net to go, okay, well, I went off the rails. Let me go see where I went wrong. And I still want to do it myself, but I want to be able to fix it myself. And then if I've created an edge case, then I'll ask for help because, wow, it's on fire for real now.
Yeah, I think one of the phrases I like to use is like immediate and functional. And it has to be, people want functional things. They're like, is this functional or not? Is this a functional experience?
Yep.
And I think we're moving more and more towards that. Just like your son, he's like, is this functional or is it not functional for me? Is this immediate or not immediate?
Yep.
Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, super interesting how that's happening. And I do think the world of video tutorials and all that has changed a lot. I mean,
Mhm.
just it's easier to create video content than ever before. And before it's like there was lots of recommendations in the technical writing world where I was saying, stay away from creating video content. If you got to update it, it's going to be super painful. And now they have things like write the instructions, hand it off to the software, and it'll create like an AI talking
Yeah.
talking with instructions for you. It's mind-boggling. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other piece is we're a small world community now. And one of the things I do push for when I talk to my developers and they send me a doc that they've written themselves and I'll go and edit it and say, well, why did you change that? Why did you spell that out? Why did you change that word? Why did you take out IE? Because we don't know what language the person is reading this speaks in. So I make language as simple as possible. I spell everything out. I don't use Latin terms. I don't use a lot of words. I minimalize. I don't say in order to. I say to. Right? Take out as many words as you can because it makes it easier for translation. Because I probably 50% of my engineers do not speak English as a first language. Some of them 3, 4 languages, and English is not in that list. So I have to appreciate what they're doing and understand like a video of showing them is often faster for them because they can see what's happening and they don't need the text. So that's another good thing to keep in mind. If you speak multiple languages, especially if you speak an Asian symbolic language and you can write technical documentation in that language, you will have marketable skills for the next 50 years.
Oh gosh, I've been trying to tell so many people that come through our university, and they're like, I don't have any technical writing experience. I'm actually just a former language teacher. And I'm just like, that's amazing. You have a huge head start. Like you don't even know. Yeah.
You really don't. My engineers are all over the world. And they so I always have to write with them in mind that I don't know what country they're in. I don't know what their language is. And it's inappropriate at this point in our careers to assume they speak English.
And I'm still don't necessarily understand how localization is going to be solved in the future. Like I haven't seen any tool that can really solve that. And I'm like, will it ever be solved at some point? Maybe, but I just haven't seen it.
It's people based. It's people based, and having done a translation project 15 years ago with people, I learned the hard way to minimalize my word use and to be very consistent. As long as you're consistent so that your translators, because it's going to be a person most likely, even if it's a translation software, a person wrote it. So understanding the fewer words they have to translate and they can create their word bank off of your consistent language use, the better your translated documentation will be. So the localization effort at Riot, we have a localization team because our games are worldwide. So we have that piece. But yeah, it's a constant learning of where our players are, where our customers are, where our engineers are, and what languages they use, and the consistency in your word use and your word choice is important. Figure out what a thing is called and always call it that.
Yeah, that's so true. And I would imagine that, companies are likely moving towards also establishing more style guides in other languages too, to help with that consistency factor. It's something I haven't seen a lot, but I would imagine that, and I would hope that that would be some direction that they're moving in to solve that.
Our UX teams are where that's living first because they have to help our developers when you're creating an on-screen presence. The translated text will often be shorter or longer than what it is in the native language it was written in. So we have to make our text boxes expand or contract based on the language it's displaying in. So those are where the style guides are coming from first, is from our UX designers and our information architects who are dealing with how people are using the information and using the websites and consuming the content. So that's where the style guides are coming from first. So collaborating, find your UX designers. They are wonderful teammates. They are wonderful people to know because they're also boots on the ground early in the process. Oftentimes, your UX designers will be included in the early design phases. So if you buddy up with them, you're going to hear things early.
So true. And I think it's like that limited space on like a menu bar, right? There's only so much space, and if you translate something and all of a sudden it's all distorted.
And you
Yeah.
get weird wrapping and you get weird displays and suddenly you get like text over images and yeah, it causes problems. So your UX designers are where the styles are coming from first. And when you write a style guide, oftentimes the tech writers will write the style guides. I've written many. Crib off of Google, Microsoft Manual of Style. I still use Chicago for certain things, AP for certain things. I still have Strunk and White on my desk. My elements of style is never far away. Um, know your language, know your language. And at Riot, we have, as technical writers, we have to marry proper grammar, development speak, which is often different, and then the company speak, whatever vernacular your company uses. So marrying those three things and understanding, that's where your consistency comes in. And that's where your style guide will come from, is understanding what your company voice is and what you want to put out there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's also, why we see the rise, the role of the UX writer today,
Mhm.
which technical writing and UX writing, and sometimes the person's asked to do, both jobs, right?
I've done
And
those.
yeah, and it's like I thought I was just supposed to work on this part of documentation here, and now my scope has turned into this. Like, how did that happen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, yeah, pick your lane and stay in your lane and be true to your lane. Like if someone says, "Oh, can you do this?" I liken technical writers to the service animal dogs that failed the final test. We want to help. We want to create good stuff. We know all the tools, we know everything we need to do, but we may get you into trouble.
And one more question before we go is
Mhm.
prioritization. So many technical writers that join a new company, maybe their first time, this is
Mhm.
something they really struggle with, is prioritizing the right things and just
Mhm.
ensuring, because like we just said, like scope and start here and just go to there, and all of a sudden they're like, what am I supposed to be working on?
Mhm.
How do you recommend them deal with that type of challenge?
Identify your proof of concept, identify what your minimum viable product is, your MVP, and identify what ship looks like. Because if you can identify those three things, sometimes they need a proof of concept so they can see what you need to do. And that gives you your ability to scope out your work. Because an engineer and a developer and a product lead, they don't know what a technical writer has to do to deliver and how much content they have to deliver. So in the early phases, you see, okay, yeah, you're making a feature, but this is going to take a lot of things from me to create. because you have multiple processes that you can do with this thing. It's not just push a button. You need all these fields to do. So I have all of these things that you can do. So you create a proof of concept to say, okay, here's my table of contents. I identified 10 things that a user can do with this. So that's 10 topics plus indexing, plus search, plus meta. Oh, okay, that's great. What's it going to look like? You work with a UX designer to lay out your POC. Then you say, okay, what is absolutely required from me to ship? What will make the users not have pain? There's things that are supplementary, but what do they need to do to get on the ground and get running? Okay, that's your minimum, that's your MVP, that's minimum viable. Then ship is the next iteration. Documentation is iterative. We're never done. we're done with MVP. We're done with version 1. We're done with version 2. We're never done until it's sunsetted, deprecated, and off our site or in the library somewhere in an archive. That's when it's truly done and closed. So identifying that you're iterating and that you're never truly going to be done is how you set your priorities. Understand what a customer needs out of the gate. And sometimes it's 1 or 2 things. It's like, great, I can do the 1 or 2 things on your deadline. And then I can continue to update and add the new features as you get them finalized. And creating that iterative process is what matters.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Very process oriented, right? At the end of the day, it's like you got to focus on the process, especially if you're never done. If that's not a good process, well, nothing's going to end up well, right? You're not going to feel good
Right.
if you don't enjoy the part in the middle.
Yeah.
And with that said, is there anything else that you want to let the audience know about? Any other recommendations or advice before we go?
I am super grateful for this opportunity, and I so love my technical writing community. I cannot stress enough how important it is to ask for help. Join a community like Write the Docs, or join your local STC chapter, something where you can find, or your community, obviously, right here at Technical Writers HQ. Find your people who, I mean, I have a Slack channel called Donkey Rescue. That's me and my tech writer friends. Because when I break something, these are all people I've worked with in the past, and I can send them, hey, this isn't working. And they say, oh, you need to do this. Did you forget that? It's like, yeah, I totally did. So find your people, even if, my donkey rescue team, they're always saving my ass. That's what we do. And if you find your people and then you're truly never a lone writer. You might be alone in your current post, but if you have your people in your community that you can reach out to, then you're never truly alone and you can solve your problems. And that keeps us from staying up late at night and stressing about our problems, because there are people, without violating your NDAs, you can still ask for help outside of your company.
Well, Heather, thank you so much for being here with us today. And if anybody has any questions that they have after this, make sure to go ahead and just leave them in the comments. I'll be sure to check them out, and we'll respond to them if you leave them there. And that's it. We'll go ahead and rock and roll. Yeah, we'll rock and roll from here. And thank you once again.
Thanks very much.